great to see everybody here. So this is our 6th year of marching. We started as a group in 2010 and our first march was in 2011. So we've been building and growing and meeting new people and building our strength. So I'm really glad to see you all here today. And this is our statement. Our theme this year was "Now is the time. We rely on ourselves to struggle for a new society." This year we gather on International Women's Day at a time when women's resistance is on the rise. The historic mobilizations led by women around the world after Trump's inauguration reminded us of the true power we hold when we resist collectively. The past year has brought greater urgency to the task of building safety and strength through our collective resistance and solidarity. Trump is testing the extent to which state and corporate power can be imposed against the people of America and the world. In Canada, Trudeau's Liberals are celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Canadian state, papering over the shocking past and present injustices of Canada's colonialism on this land and imperialism around the world. On International Women's Day, women raise their voices around the world. More and more women are saying no to violence and hate, to war and poverty and inequality. But women know all too well that saying no is often not enough. We know that we must be resolute in our determination to educate, organize, and mobilize ourselves to defend our rights and the rights of all. Historically and internationally, women have always been at the forefront of all movements defending people's rights. It is through these struggles that we find our greatest dignity and strength in defiance of systemic exploitation and oppression. The women of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa said, "Now you have touched the women, you have struck a rock. You have dislodged a boulder, you will be crushed." The women of the garment industry who inspired the creation of International Women's Day more than 100 years ago came together in their unions and led thousands of workers on strike to demand improvements to their pay and working conditions, a struggle that inspired workers around the world. The first official celebration of International Women's Day focused on the call for peace, voiced by the women of Europe prior to the First World War, and the mobilization of women in anti-war movements is more important today than ever. Here in Canada, Indigenous women have demanded justice at memorial marches and countless other ceremonies, demonstrations, and gatherings. We must all join in, accept that we are all treaty people. Learn that there is no safety without sovereignty. Without the power to say, we decide what happens to our bodies as well as to our planet. Oh man, my voice is going, I haven't even started chanting. Marching on International Women's Day helps us feel connected to the global network of women's organized resistance and find motivation to continue our struggles for our inherent rights. We come together to say no, to stand up to the shameless bulldozing of rights, freedoms, and sovereignty at home and around the world, and also to say yes, to imagine and work to build a new society, one that acknowledges our collective responsibility to care for young and old, and that respects the rights of all. Now is the time. We rely on ourselves to struggle for a new society. The women, united, will never be defeated. Happy International Women's Day. Our Elder Ruth Morin acknowledge the territory and join us to lead us in a prayer that what we're doing here today is for a good effect, that we're coming together in a way that will advance our struggles in a positive way, that we will be able to find unity and strength by coming together. So I just want to take the time again to acknowledge the fact that we are gathered here on Treaty 6 territory. Our group is the Edmonton International Women's Day Committee, and we've been doing these marches since 2011, or 2012 rather. Our first was more of an informal gathering, and then we've been marching since 2012. So we're growing, we're building, we're echoing. I'm not used to hearing hearing my voice echo through this space, but yeah, I think we're reaching more people and just building on the strength that we have established over the years. So I'm very pleased to see you all here today. This year is a time when as we recognize that women's resistance is on the rise. So we were looking at the historic mobilizations of women after the Trump inauguration, not just in the United States, here in Canada and around the world. There was really an important expression of our power that we have as women when we come together collectively to resist. And we've seen that this year has been a year when we feel very urgently the task of coming together to build our safety and our strength through our collective resistance and solidarity. We're seeing that state and corporate powers are being pushed to the limits in terms of what they can impose upon women, impose upon people. The limits and lines that they're drawing are unprecedented. And here in Canada as well, we really want to highlight the fact that, there are big problems here. I think Trudeau's maybe running a bit under the radar with all of the craziness that's going on in the United States, but we really want to focus in on how he's actually working in partnership with Trump to limit people's rights, impose severe restrictions on the borders. He'll talk about welcoming refugees, but those people who do come are met in handcuffs. So on the 150th anniversary of Canada, the Canadian state, we really want to not allow that celebration to paper over all the injustices of the Canadian colonization, past and present injustices, as well as the imperialism of the Canadian state around the world. So it's an opportunity for us as women to join with other women around the world in raising our voices to say no. So we know that more and more women are saying no. No to violence, no to hate, no to poverty and inequality and war. And these are the reasons why we're gathered here today. I'm sure everybody has their different reasons for why they're marching on International Women's Day. But what we have in common is that we stand up to say no to that kind of bulldozing of our rights. But unfortunately, as we know all too well, as women, saying no is often not enough. So we know that we need to be very determined in defending our rights, that we must come together to educate, organize, and mobilize ourselves. So this is the banner for our committee, and that's what it speaks to, the bricks that are the barriers that we're facing. So, the fact that we're facing low pay, privatization, layoffs, racism, violence, all those kinds of things that keep us from achieving our full equality and our full potential. But what will allow us to rise above that is coming together to educate ourselves, organize ourselves, and mobilize ourselves as we've done here today. So historically and internationally, women have always been at the forefront of movements defending people's rights. And it's in those struggles that we find our greatest dignity. So one of our slogans is that women's dignity lies in the fight for the rights of all. So, we don't see women only active in fights for women's rights. We see women active wherever their families and communities need to be defended. Whenever there's services that are being cut back, that are impacting our communities, or violence, or colonialism, or whatever it is that is impacting our communities, you'll see women in the forefront of those struggles defending. So I didn't know this quote from the women of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, but I wanted to share it. They said, "Now you have touched the women, you have struck a rock. You have dislodged a boulder, and you will be crushed." So, very strong. That's the kind of strength and power that we need to remind ourselves that we do have. And when you see women get pushed to the point where they have no choice but to stand up, no choice but to defend, then they're the most resolute and determined people in those struggles. So for those of you that don't know the history of International Women's Day, it dates back over 100 years. So the inspiration first came from the women of the garment industry. So they were mostly immigrant women from all over the world. A lot of Jewish women, a lot of Italian women, but a very diverse group of workers who were pushed to migrate, to find a better life, to find work. But the working conditions that they found in the textiles industry and the garment factories were deadly, dangerous, and difficult. So these women came together in the thousands and led thousands of women through their unions on strike. demanding improvements to their pay and working conditions. And their struggle was seen around the world, so it was an inspiration not just to workers, but to all people in terms of what can be done when we stand up to defend our rights. The first official celebration of International Women's Day focused on a call for peace, and that was voiced by the women of Europe in the lead up to the First World War. And that call and the leadership and mobilization of women in anti-war movements is extremely important right now. So we can see that there's a growing militarism and growing war agenda that we're seeing all over the world. So we urgently need to add our voices to anti-war movements here and around the world. And then, of course, here in Canada, we have to pay a great deal of attention to the fact that we are going to be seeing the start of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Tribunal, which was a hard fought for thing. Yeah. It took many, many years to have that happen, but we also know that that's just the start. So I wanted to, if Cynthia Cardinal could just wave her hand here. She's going to be the local Alberta person for the inquiry. So if people need more information, need to get connected, please do find Cynthia Cardinal. And it's not just for those of us who have been touched directly by the issue of missing and murdered women that need to speak up. All of us need to join in. So we all need to accept that we are all treaty people. And we need to learn that there's no safety without sovereignty, without the power to say we decide what happens to our bodies as well as to our planet. Marching on International Women's Day will help us to feel connected to that global network of women's organized resistance and to find motivation to continue our struggle for our inherent rights. So today we're marching a little early. We have a cold and dark climate, so it's a little difficult for us to march in the evening on March 8th. But we know that already, in the days and weeks that are coming, the lead up to International Women's Day, all over the world, millions of women will be marching. And we are a part of that here in Edmonton. So when we do that, when we march on International Women's Day, we come together to say no, to stand up against the shameless bulldozing of rights, freedoms, and sovereignty at home and around the world. And also to say yes, to imagine and to work to build a new society, one that acknowledges our collective responsibility to care for young and old, and that respects the rights of all. Now is the time. We rely on ourselves, all of us here today, to struggle together for a new society, because the women united will never be defeated. Happy International Women's Day.